On Christmas Eve in Spokane, Washington, with the temperature outside dropping to 32 degrees Fahrenheit, I showed up at my daughter's house without warning. My name is Linda Morales, a 55-year-old mother and former Taekwondo coach, long accustomed to discipline and endurance. But nothing could have prepared me for the sight before my eyes. My daughter, Grace, curled up on the porch in nothing but a thin blouse, her lips turning blue, while inside the warm house, the Crawford family raised glasses of wine, laughing by the fireplace. Ethan Crawford, Grace's husband, sat with his parents Richard and Diane, and his sister Lauren, basking in their comfortable world, while my daughter was abandoned in the freezing cold. A cruel paradox. A lavish table filled with roasted turkey, red wine, and Christmas music, while just beyond the door, my own flesh and blood shivered in the snow. What mother could stand by and remain silent? What mother could endure such cruelty without acting? This wasn't just humiliation for Grace, it was a direct declaration of war against me. Because the stakes here weren't only my daughter's survival, but the honor of the Morales family, and the undeniable truth of the emotional abuse they tried to bury. They thought power would keep them safe. But they were wrong. In the world of revenge stories, every crime leaves a trace. I pulled Grace tightly into my arms, drew a long breath, and pushed the door open to their glittering celebration. This was only the beginning. My name is Linda Morales, 55 years old, a woman who spent her life on the Taekwondo mats. Years of training and coaching taught me not only how to deliver a powerful kick, but also how to live with discipline and the habit of noticing every small detail. I live in a modest apartment near Manito Park in Spokane, Washington. Inside are only a few simple possessions. An old tea set I've had since I was young, my mother's wooden pendulum clock, and most importantly, a steel cabinet where I carefully store every document, from bank transfers to my daughter to handwritten letters. My habit has always been to write things down, take photos of anything important, and never ignore evidence, because I believe in one golden rule. Every system, whether human or technological, leaves a trace. That rule would later become my trump card. Every smart system leaves a log, and the truth never disappears. My daughter Grace grew up under my care. She was gentle, loved to cook, and once dreamed of opening a small bakery downtown. Life, however, had other plans. When she met Ethan Crawford, a polished lawyer, she thought she had found her safe harbor. In the early days of marriage, she would call me saying, "Mom, Ethan bought me a red KitchenAid mixer. I'll be baking all day long." I can still hear the joy in her voice. But after repeated miscarriages, that voice faded. The calls turned into whispers in the night. "Mom, I'm so tired, I feel useless." From afar, all I could do was send more money, hoping it would ease her pain. I transferred funds often, always writing notes like, "for kitchen supplies," or "for medicine," yet the money vanished quickly. Grace would only say, "He told me we don't need it, Mom." I grew suspicious, but I never had concrete proof. My relationship with the Crawfords was cold from the beginning. Richard, Grace's father-in-law, once a stern judge, looked at me the first time we met and said, "Law defines truth, not feelings." Diane played polite but laced every smile with mockery. Grace is lucky to have a lawyer husband. What else could the daughter of a martial arts coach do besides teach kicks? Lauren, Ethan's sister, always pried into private matters and retold them like jokes. That family suffocated me, but Grace believed she could win their approval. I told her, "You don't need to prove anything. Happiness is yours to decide." She forced a smile, whispering, "I just want to be accepted, Mom." Still, I've always been one to prepare. In my kitchen drawer sits an old but working camera, always ready. On my phone, I keep a folder named Grace, filled with photos of transfers, text messages, even recordings of conversations. It was instinct, the kind of habit a seasoned mother carries. Preserve evidence, just in case. I never imagined those little things, meant only to reassure me, would become the foundation of a coming battle. One autumn afternoon, I called Grace, but she didn't pick up. I left a message, "Are you okay? I miss you." She replied the next day, short and guarded, "I'm fine, busy." The words sounded like someone was standing beside her. From then on, my calls went unanswered more often. A chill crept down my spine, the sense my daughter was being isolated inside her own home. I confided in Jake, a former student now working as a traffic officer. "I'm worried about her, Jake. She's different." I said. His eyes hardened. If you ever need a witness, call me. I'll stand by you. I nodded, though unease grew inside me. By winter, when snow blanketed the slopes of South Hill, I decided to trust my instincts. On Christmas Eve, I went straight to the Crawford house without a word, determined to see my daughter with my own eyes. I had no idea what I was about to witness would change everything, turning a festive holiday dinner into the start of a brutal confrontation. I still remember the biting cold of that Christmas Eve, the kind that cuts straight through skin. Each step sank into the thick snow as I climbed toward the Crawfords' house on South Hill. The golden light spilling from the wide front window made the night outside feel even harsher. From a distance, I could already hear the bursts of laughter, the clinking of glasses, and jingle bells playing on repeat. My heart pounded as I drew closer. The mother in me longed to see my daughter happy, but a gnawing instinct warned me to brace for the opposite. As I leaned near the window, I caught Richard's deep voice, sharp with mockery. A woman who's miscarried 4 times still wants to bring pride to this family? What a disgrace. Then Diane's bitter laugh followed. Feeding her is a waste. She's useless, just another burden. My chest tightened, hot blood rushing to my head. Ethan's voice cut through next, loud and clear. If it weren't for me and my parents, I'd have thrown her out long ago. Each word was a knife twisting into my heart. I turned, trembling, and saw her. Right there on the porch, Grace sat hunched in a snow-covered wooden chair. Her soaked hair clung to her forehead, her frail shoulders shivering beneath a thin blouse. Her hands were purple, her lips quivering, her eyes shut as if life clung by a thread. Inside, the Crawfords reveled in wine and laughter, oblivious to the cruelty outside. I rushed forward, stripping off my heavy coat and wrapping it around her. "Grace, baby," I cried. Her red eyes flickered open, her voice a faint whisper, "Mom," before she collapsed in my arms. Her body was frozen stiff, and I knew if I had come minutes later, it would have been too late. I held her tight, tears dripping into her damp hair. "No one gets to do this to you, Grace. No one," I raged silently, fury and grief colliding. In that instant, I wasn't just a mother anymore. I was a warrior, ready to take on an entire powerful family. Carrying her, I pounded on the wooden door. The music and laughter inside halted. Diane opened it, still clutching a wine glass, her smile polite but her eyes cold. "Oh, Linda, what a surprise. Why didn't you call first so we could welcome you properly?" she cooed. I locked eyes with her, spitting out each word. If I had called, I wouldn't have seen this. I tilted my shoulder, showing Grace limp in my arms. Diane shrugged, her voice dripping disdain. "She just wanted some fresh air. Don't exaggerate." My hands shook, not from cold but from rage. Ethan stumbled out, reeking of wine, his arrogance thick. "Mother-in-law, don't make a scene. This is my house, and I decide who belongs in it." Clutching Grace, I stormed into their glowing living room, voices hushed as if I were an intruder. I shouted, thunder in my chest, "This isn't fresh air. This is abuse. This is cruelty." Suddenly, I remembered Grace once mentioning, "Mom, Ethan always messes with the smart doorbell, turning it off, locking it." At that very moment, my phone buzzed. A backup email from Grace's account, synced to mine, popped up. I opened it and read a single chilling line Ethan had sent to Lauren just before the party. Evidence. Email, 6:42 p.m. Turn off the doorbell. She'll sit outside and cool off. The words froze me. This wasn't negligence. It was a calculated act. I raised my head, glaring at Ethan and the Crawfords. "I won't let this be buried. I have proof, and I won't stay silent." They faltered, but Richard's deep, commanding voice cut in, cold as ice. "This is a family matter. You have no right to interfere." But I knew, as Grace's mother, I not only had the right, I had the duty. And that Christmas Eve, I swore I would tear down every locked door, no matter how fortified by law or power. I held my daughter close, her breath faint in my ear, and in my eyes sparked the fire of a battle just ignited. I thought I had seen the worst. But the truth was, worse was coming. I brought Grace back to my small apartment after that Christmas Eve. What had once been just a quiet shelter now became the only place where she could be safe, from the cold outside and from the cruelty of the Crawford household. I made hot cocoa, set it before her, but Grace only clutched a blanket, her eyes hollow. I knew the road ahead would be anything but easy. And then, one after another, came the blows that pushed me into isolation, as if the entire system was conspiring against me. The first blow came at the very first hearing. James Porter, the lawyer who stood with us, presented the recording from Christmas Eve. Ethan's mocking, Diane's scorn, and Richard declaring Grace a disgrace to the family. All were captured. I was certain it would change everything. But as soon as it played, the Crawfords' attorney leapt to his feet, objecting sharply. He insisted it was illegally obtained, a violation of privacy rights. I rose to protest, but Richard's deep, commanding voice cut in. He looked the judge in the eye and declared that the court could not accept such unlawful evidence. The gavel fell. The recording was struck. Just like that, our strongest weapon was ripped from us. Grace's trembling hands squeezed mine, her body shaking. It was the moment I felt our voices silenced in broad daylight. The outcome was devastating. Whatever fragile belief we held in justice crumbled before our eyes. The second blow came later that same week. I sat at my small dining table, reviewing old bank transfer slips I had sent Grace over the years. Suddenly, a thick envelope slid under my door. I opened it to find a crude, printed note. "Stay away from the Crawfords if you don't want to end up like your daughter." My hands shook, but I held on tight, refusing to let rage cloud my judgment. I called Jake, my former student, now a police officer. He came quickly, gloved hands placing the envelope in an evidence bag, carefully noting every detail. "They want fear to silence you," Jake said, "but this letter could work against them too." The next day, he handed me a preliminary report. The paper used was sold at only one print shop in the neighborhood. The owner, Lauren Crawford. The report logged the find. Evidence, 11:32 p.m., police record of threat letter printed at Lauren Crawford's shop. My fists clenched as I read it, realizing the Crawfords were not just humiliating Grace, but trying to intimidate me as well. Yet the bitter truth, the court dismissed it as a mere anonymous threat. Once again, Grace and I were ignored, our struggle invisible. The third blow came in another hearing. This time, the Crawfords called Martha, their former housekeeper, to the stand. I once hoped she would speak the truth, for she had seen Grace mistreated firsthand. But when she took the stand, her head bowed, her voice quivering, she claimed Grace often locked herself away, leaving the housework to her. My heart thundered. I shot up, shouting that it was a lie, that Grace had sent me photos of her baking, had described to me her preparations for family dinners. But the judge's gavel struck hard, silencing me. I turned to see tears streaming down Grace's face, her shoulders shaking with humiliation. Around us, whispers spread. I heard people murmur that perhaps Grace really was lazy. That moment cut deeper than any wound. My daughter wasn't just slandered, she was turned into a joke. The outcome was clear. Her dignity was shattered, and instead of sympathy, suspicion surrounded us. 3 blows, like hammers against our skulls. Evidence dismissed, a threat ignored, a witness bought. I felt like a soldier stripped bare in the middle of a battlefield. Jake tried to reassure me, promising he would testify, but I knew unless we landed a decisive strike, we would be crushed under the Crawfords' power. At the next hearing, Ethan arrived exuding smug confidence. He wore a tailored suit, his eyes gleaming with defiance. Behind him, Richard sat with the same cold face, orchestrating the board like a chess master. Diane leaned to whisper in his ear, a victorious smirk tugging at her lips. In that moment, I knew the Crawfords weren't finished. They were preparing to go further than ever before. And the next move they made would be the most dangerous yet. The Crawfords were about to overreach. I will never forget that winter morning when I stepped into the courthouse and realized this battle was far harsher than I had imagined. After the first chain of setbacks, I understood the Crawfords had power and connections, but I still clung to a fragile hope that justice existed somewhere. Yet in the days that followed, the truth proved colder than the snow outside, and I began to see clearly the hand pulling every string. At the 4th hearing, my lawyer, James Porter, tried to re-establish the argument that Grace was a victim of psychological abuse. He presented medical records from Dr. Elise Harper, a therapist, documenting Grace's severe depression after 4 miscarriages and the prolonged humiliation from her in-laws. Elise stood at the witness stand, her voice steady. "Without intervention, this patient will lose the will to live." I was sure those words would silence the entire room. But within minutes, the Crawfords' lawyer struck back with a thick file. Photos of Grace forcing a smile at family gatherings, short, polite text messages she had sent Ethan. They twisted these into the image of a woman pretending to be ill to avoid responsibility. I nearly jumped up screaming. That's a lie. Those smiles were a mask. My daughter drowned in tears every night. But Richard, seated calmly behind them, gave a small cough. Instantly, the room shifted. I saw the judge's eyes flicker, as if swayed by something bigger than truth. That was the moment I realized. Richard was the true puppeteer. He was no longer a judge, but his network still ran deep. He knew every loophole in Spokane's courts, every official who still owed him respect. Ethan might be the face, but Richard was the shadow bending justice to his will. The hidden engine I had feared was now in full view. The next blow hit even harder. During another session, the Crawfords' lawyer produced an envelope containing copies of bank transfers. They were mine, money I had sent Grace out of love and support. Yet he declared coldly, these transfers prove Grace was entirely dependent on her mother, incapable of sustaining her marriage. Ethan bore every financial burden. My chest tightened. What had been gifts of compassion was now a weapon turned against my daughter. During recess, Jake called me. His voice was low, measured. You need to hear this. He sent me a file from a maintenance worker tied to the Crawford security system. My pulse raced as I opened it. Evidence. System log, 8:17 p.m. on Christmas Eve. Doorbell disabled, outdoor temperature 32 Fahrenheit, lock engaged inside. The exact moment Grace sat shivering outside. Numbers cold as ice, yet perfectly aligned with the nightmare I had witnessed. I wanted to storm back into court with it immediately, but James gripped my arm. Patience. We need procedure. If we rush, they'll strike it out. My chest burned with fury. I wanted to scream the truth to the world, but for now, we had to wait. And while I waited, Richard made his move. Right after recess, he walked toward us, leaned close, and murmured in my ear, "Do you really think you can win? This courthouse was once my home. I know who sits where, who listens to whom. Stop, before Grace suffers more." His arrogance was suffocating, his belief in untouchable power carved into every word. My fists clenched until my palms bled. In the days that followed, local media picked up the story. But instead of truth, articles echoed the Crawfords' narrative. Grace painted as fragile, dependent, irresponsible. One headline read, "Crawford family burdened by troubled daughter-in-law." It was Richard's influence, manipulating even the press to isolate us. Friends turned distant, neighbors looked away, suspicion replaced sympathy. Grace and I were cornered, with only Jake and James standing beside us. One evening, I found Grace staring out at the snow, her voice faint. "Mom, maybe they're right. Maybe I really am useless." I sat beside her, holding her shoulders. "Don't believe them. You're not useless. They want to break you, but I won't let them." I felt as though I was losing her again, not to the cold outside, but to the invisible cruelty the Crawfords had built. Defeat after defeat nearly crushed me. Yet in that darkest moment, my rule returned to me. Every smart system leaves a trace. And the log Jake had uncovered was living proof. It could be the blade sharp enough to sever the Crawfords' grip on power. I closed the file, inhaled deeply. This fight was no longer about defense. It was time to strike back, to use their own systems and rules to bring them down. For the first time, I began to think of revenge, a plan rooted in the very principle I had always believed. The hour of counterattack was near, and it would be built on the very logs they thought they had erased. I had endured enough blows, but instead of breaking me, they transformed me into a true fighter. If the Crawfords believed their power could erase every trace, they were wrong. I began to map out my counterstrike, a plan I called Cage in my Heart. 4 steps: collect, align, gamble, and edge. The first step was collect. I needed to gather every shred of evidence, no matter how small. I dug through old bank slips, every transfer I had sent Grace over the years. Each note, for medicine or for bakery supplies, was now proof that I had always supported her. I pulled together photos of melted snow on the porch that Christmas Eve, Grace's soaked slippers left behind, and the handwritten notes I scribbled right after that night. I carried everything to James, my lawyer. He nodded, his eyes sharp. Even the smallest details become claws once we link them. I leaned on Jake, too, my former student turned cop. He showed me his radio log from that night, time-stamped, proving he had stood outside the Crawford's house and heard the mocking laughter spill out. "I'll testify," he said firmly. Dr. Elise Harper also promised to strengthen the case with Grace's psychiatric records. "No one can fake wounds like hers," she told me gently. Next came a line. I had to line up every ally. James and I divided the work. He would handle the filings, I would find more witnesses. I knocked on the Crawfords' neighbors' doors, urging them to speak up about seeing Grace left on the porch in freezing weather. At first, an elderly couple hesitated. "We did see, but Richard scares us," they whispered. I breathed deeply, answering, "If you stay silent, Grace will never be protected. We need the truth." After several visits, they finally agreed to sign a statement. I also reached the pharmacist nearby who had sold Grace sedatives. He confirmed she came often, sometimes her hands shook so badly she couldn't hold her change. Piece by piece, I stitched a picture the Crawfords couldn't deny. At the same time, I connected with a local support group for psychological abuse victims in Spokane. They linked me to a journalist who vowed to report fairly, not under Richard's thumb. Then came gamble. This was the risk I had to take. James suggested filing to change the judge, citing conflict of interest. Dangerous, because if we failed, we would anger the entire system. But I agreed. We can't let Richard keep pulling strings from the shadows. On the hearing day, James stood tall and argued that Richard had privately socialized with the sitting judge. The courtroom buzzed. I saw Richard frown, Ethan clench his fists. After tense minutes, the court approved the request for reassignment. A breakthrough. Yet I knew it also painted a larger target on our backs. The Crawfords would not sit quietly while their grips slipped. The final step was edge. This was the advantage I had to time perfectly. Every smart system leaves a trace. I held on to the ring and nest logs Jake had found, but I hadn't revealed them, not even to James. They were my blade hidden in the sleeve. If I revealed them too soon, the Crawfords would twist or destroy them. I chose patience, saving them for the decisive moment. Meanwhile, I reinforced smaller pieces, the radio log, the pharmacist's note, the neighbor's statement. All were locked inside my steel cabinet, secured with a code. I called it my iron cage, the vault where I kept the truth captive. Still, the risks loomed. If the logs were deemed inadmissible, we would lose our ace. If neighbors were threatened and withdrew, we would lose key witnesses. If media manipulation continued, public opinion would crush us. Worse, Richard could drag the process out until I was drained of strength and money. And always, Grace's fading spirit haunted me. I feared she might collapse before she ever saw justice. One snowy evening, I stood on my balcony, watching flakes fall thick and heavy. In my mind, I laid out each step of the plan. Who would testify, when the evidence would land? For the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of hope. But just when I thought the plan was solid, something unexpected shattered it. That night, when I opened the steel cabinet to review the files, one envelope was gone. The neighbors that signed statement had vanished. My body went cold, sweat breaking across my skin. Someone had reached into my apartment. Someone was dismantling my iron cage. The revenge plan I had built piece by piece was suddenly under siege. And I realized the real war had only begun, because the Crawfords had just struck at the very heart of my evidence. I had reached the point of no return. After carefully building my plan, I began to execute each step like a match on the taekwondo mat, focused, disciplined, and ready to strike the decisive blow. The first move was preserving the scene. In the first week, Jake and I returned to the Crawford house, this time with legal clearance from James's emergency filing. We photographed the water stains still marking the porch, documented the thin blouse Grace had worn that night, and wrote an official report. Jake handed me a supplemental statement, his voice firm. No one can say this is just imagination anymore. I clutched the folder of photos, knowing each small detail might save my daughter. Next came the medical records. I took Grace to see Dr. Elise Harper regularly, ensuring every visit was documented and systematized. Elise produced a detailed report describing major depression caused by psychological abuse and repeated miscarriages. She looked me straight in the eye and said, "She must be recognized as a victim, not a pretender." I saw Grace's thin frame, but for the first time her eyes flickered with hope, knowing someone believed her. After that, James filed for a temporary protection order. It was a critical step. If approved, Grace would be separated from Ethan throughout proceedings. The court granted it partially, allowing Ethan to retain access to shared assets. It was a small setback, but we pressed on. James reminded me, we have to keep pace, don't let them sense hesitation. Another decisive move was discovery. James filed to compel the Crawfords to release the ring and nest logs, alcohol purchase records from Christmas Eve, and internal communications. Richard exploded, shouting that it was an invasion of privacy. But the new judge, after weighing the motion, granted limited access. And that's when we struck gold. Evidence: Nest System Report, 8:15 p.m. on December 24th, recorded outdoor temperature 32 Fahrenheit, while the front door lock was engaged from inside. Immediately after, ring logs showed the camera disabled for 2 full hours. Proof that Grace had been deliberately left in the cold. We assembled witnesses. Jake prepared his testimony from his patrol radio log. The elderly neighbors signed a new statement, reassured by the protection order. The neighborhood pharmacist confirmed he had sold Grace sedatives on multiple occasions. Each account, each detail, I carefully stacked into order. When the crucial hearing arrived, James stood tall and delivered each piece: scene photographs, medical reports, witness testimonies, and finally the nest and ring logs. The courtroom fell silent, only James's voice carrying. Ethan turned pale. Richard furrowed his brow for the first time. I knew the blow had landed where they least expected. But then came the major setback, a blade straight to my chest. The Crawford's lawyer suddenly unveiled a supposed email from Grace to me, claiming she had sat on the porch for fresh air and that everything was exaggerated by her mother. The room erupted. My breath froze. Grace burst into tears. They had fabricated evidence, and worse, people believed it. In that moment, I thought the plan had collapsed. But then I remembered my principle. Every system leaves a trace. I whispered to James, we need metadata. He immediately requested technical analysis. The results showed the email had been forged from an anonymous server, but the IP address traced directly to Lauren Crawford's print shop. The courtroom roared again, this time against the Crawfords. The fake evidence had nearly destroyed us, but adaptation turned the tide. I rose, eyes locked on Richard and Ethan. You can twist words, you can buy witnesses, but you cannot erase digital footprints. The truth is always logged. The hearing adjourned under unbearable tension. We had held the line, but I knew one thing for certain. The Crawfords weren't finished. They still had venomous moves left. As I stepped out with Grace in my arms, I whispered that this was not the end. In my mind, one thought pounded like a drum. There was still one last move. On the final judgment day at the Spokane County Superior Court, the sky was gray, the winter wind howling through the windows, but inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was even heavier. I walked in with Grace, my hand clutching hers, both of us trembling not from the cold, but from the weight of the moment. Ethan sat across the room, adjusting his tie, trying to look confident. Richard folded his arms, his eyes cold, while Diane and Lauren whispered to each other, as if preparing to mock any failure we might suffer. I drew a deep breath, reminding myself this battle was not only for Grace but for everyone who had ever been buried in silence. James rose, his voice clear. He skipped the pleasantries and went straight to the truth. Today, we will show this court a chain of evidence that cannot be denied. Each small piece, when placed together, paints the real picture of what happened on Christmas Eve. He gave me a slight nod. I knew it was time to bring the curtain down. The first piece was recalled. Ethan's email to Lauren that very night. The cold command to shut off the doorbell so Grace would cool off. I remembered the first time I read it, how it felt like someone tightening a noose around my heart. But now, read aloud in the courtroom, every word sent a chill down spines. Ethan stared at the floor, fists clenched. The second piece. The threatening envelope shoved under my door, the words scrawled across it. Stay away from the Crawfords, or end up like your daughter. Police reports tied the paper stock directly to Lauren's print shop. Diane paled. Lauren glanced at her father. They knew their scare tactic had boomeranged into damning proof. The third piece, the ring and nest logs, recording at precisely 8:15 p.m., the front door lock engaged from inside, the camera disabled, the outside temperature at 32 degrees Fahrenheit. The exact moment Grace sat shivering on the porch. The numbers, cold, clinical, landed like iron hammers against their denials. The Crawford's lawyer tried to interrupt, but the new judge allowed the evidence to be fully presented. The fourth piece: metadata from the forged email they once used to discredit Grace. A tech expert confirmed it originated from a server tied directly to Lauren's print shop IP. Murmurs spread through the gallery, eyes turning toward the Crawfords with disgust. Richard clenched his jaw, losing his icy composure for the first time. And then, I unveiled my secret ace. From a slim case, I pulled out an internal email from Ethan, surrendered during discovery. The words glared off the page. "Dad will handle the judge tonight. You take care of the camera. Let her sit outside. She needs to learn silence." The room erupted. Richard hadn't just protected Ethan, he had orchestrated the manipulation of the court itself. Gasps filled the air. The judge pounded his gavel, but outrage could not be contained. Grace wept beside me, but these were tears of release. James closed with one sentence, sharp as the final strike. "This is not just a divorce. This is proof of systemic emotional abuse, hidden under power, but today dragged into the light." The judge sat in silence for several minutes before speaking. The court recognizes Grace Morales as a victim of emotional abuse. The court issues a full protection order, removing Ethan Crawford's access. The court redistributes assets, awarding the majority to the plaintiff. The file concerning Richard Crawford will be sent to the Washington State Judicial Ethics Commission for investigation. The gavel struck like thunder, but to me, it was a symphony of triumph. Ethan slumped, his face pale. Diane clutched her chest, gasping. Lauren broke into tears, and Richard stood frozen, his eyes vacant as his name was entered into an ethics probe. In a single moment, the fortress of power they believed untouchable cracked wide open. I turned to Grace, wrapping her tightly in my arms. She whispered through broken sobs, "Mom, I'm free." I nodded, tears flowing, but this time they were tears of boundless joy. At last, justice had spoken, and for the first time in years, I felt real light pour down, burning away the shadows the Crawford family had built. Justice served. After the trial, the Crawford name was no longer a symbol of authority in Spokane, but a reminder of arrogance and the price it demands. Richard, once a respected judge, now stood before the Ethics Commission. The glowing headlines that once praised him vanished, replaced with stories of investigation and the looming risk of losing his retirement privileges. The doors of power slammed shut, and he no longer controlled the system he once bent at will. Ethan was suspended from his law firm. Partners turned their backs, the public branded him the abuse lawyer. The career he had built so carefully collapsed within weeks. Diane quietly withdrew from the charities that once gave her a stage to flaunt status. And Lauren, once running a thriving print shop, now sat in silence as customers avoided any association. The Crawford family fractured, each member haunted by the shadow of scandal they created themselves. For me and Grace, life turned to a new chapter. We moved into a small apartment near Manitou Park, where mornings carried birdsong and evenings filled the windows with soft city light. Grace launched an online bakery, naming it Second Chance Bakery. I watched her knead dough, smiling faintly, and saw life slowly returning to her eyes. As for me, after years of being a coach, I began hosting small workshops, teaching women not only self-defense, but the importance of preserving evidence when facing emotional abuse. I found new meaning in sharing our story, turning pain into strength. Lauren was the only Crawford who came forward. Tears streaming, she admitted she had been forced to print documents and deliver threats. Her honest testimony had helped dismantle her family's grip on power. I looked at her, no longer with anger, but with recognition of a young woman caught in the whirlpool of control. I told her, "Use this mistake to do something better." In that moment, I realized that even in a revenge story, there is space for redemption and humanity. Emotional abuse leaves no bruises, but it always leaves a record. Write down the truth. Find allies. Follow the law, because the strongest strike is evidence. Linda and Grace's story ended in justice, but behind it lies a reminder for us all. What if you were in their place? Would you have the courage to stand up, to document every detail, every log, every word, to protect yourself or someone you love? If this story touched your heart, hit subscribe to the True Revenge Stories channel, press like, and share so others can hear it too. Every day we bring you new revenge stories, raw, emotional, and deeply satisfying to remind you that justice can come from anyone brave enough to speak out. And I want to hear from you. If you were Linda, would you stay silent to keep a false peace? Or step into the light to expose the truth the way she did? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice might be the strength someone else needs. Don't forget, our playlist is filled with more stories, intense confrontations, clever revenge plans, and victories that prove the power of persistence. Keep watching, because every video is like a candle, and together, they light up the darkness.